Our top focus, the G7 leaders are turning their attention to migration on day 2 of the summit in Italy. The leaders planned to discuss ways to combat human trafficking and increase investment in countries from where migrants start out. This is a crucial issue for the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who is pushing Europe to help her curb illegal flows from Africa and has launched a flagship plan to boost development in the continent to tackle the root cause of departures. But the key session in the summit comes before lunch, focusing on fair trade with China, the world's second largest economy. The issue ranges from security in the Asia-Pacific to how best to protect their industries while avoiding an outright trade war with Beijing. Notably on green technology, the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will likely lead the talks, which would also address North Korea and territorial disputes between China and its neighbors. In addition, the group of 7 rich democracies will be seeking a common response to China's alleged support of Russia's military expansion, which Washington says is fueling the war in Ukraine. The second day of the summit also coincided with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his birthday. So ahead of the resumption of the meetings, G7 leaders sang happy birthday to him.
Happy birthday to you, Olaf. Happy birthday to you.
And the US President Joe Biden called on everyone to sing to the Chancellor, saying it is a tradition of the Biden family. You've got to sing happy birthday on the birthday. The leaders then broke into a song to the delight of Scholz, who was beaming throughout the celebration.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Olaf.
Meanwhile, Pope Francis arrived at the G7 summit in southern Italy, the first head of the Catholic Church to take part in the meeting of rich nations. The Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni welcomed Pope Francis to Borgo Egnazia, where the summit is being held. The 87-year-old pontiff, who arrived by helicopter, will speak about the risks and rewards of artificial intelligence and hold 10 bilateral meetings with leaders from the US, India, Ukraine, Turkey, Brazil, among others. All right, these are live visuals coming in from Italy of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi meeting with the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. This is part of a series of bilateral meetings that the Prime Minister has on the sidelines of the G7 summit. These two leaders also met in March when Giorgia Meloni was here, and of course a series of meetings lined up for the Prime Minister. As we said, he's attending the 50th edition of the G7 meeting in Italy, and this is his first visit after assuming office as the Prime Minister of India for the 3rd consecutive term. And as we said, in his first bilateral engagement in Italy, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with the French President Emmanuel Macron on the sidelines of the G7 summit. And these are visuals now, as we said, of him meeting with the Italian Prime Minister. The two leaders reviewed the India-France relations earlier and also discussed cooperation, defense, nuclear, space and connectivity issue. They agreed to further intensify strategic defense cooperation. And as we said earlier, the Prime Minister had met with the French President, where they discussed the defense cooperation with increased focus on Make in India. France is India's second largest arms supplier and has been one of its oldest and closest partners in Europe for decades. Now, after his meeting with Macron, Prime Minister Modi held bilateral talks with the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The two leaders greeted each other with a warm hug. Prime Minister Modi reaffirmed his commitment to further strengthen the India-UK strategic partnership. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi also met with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The two leaders reviewed bilateral relationships and the exchanged views on the situation in Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi conveyed that India continues to encourage peaceful resolution of the conflict through dialogue and diplomacy. Prime Minister Modi is attending the summit as an outreach country, focusing on significant global issues impacting both the global south and the world at large. He's also scheduled to hold bilateral meetings with, as we said, he's already held that meeting, the visuals of those coming in earlier with Giorgia Meloni. The US President Biden and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi are also poised for a potential meeting during the G7 summit, as revealed by America's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. And according to reports, when the two leaders meet, there is a possibility of them also discussing the foiled murder plot against Khalistani separatists leader Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon, which according to America's National Security Advisor is a topic of dialogue between the two sides, including at very senior levels. Moreover, Prime Minister Modi will also participate in the summit session titled Artificial Intelligence, Energy, Africa-Mediterranean, which will be hosted by his Italian counterpart. The session will also be joined by Pope Francis.
Amen.
And for more on this, we're now being joined by Valentina from Italy. And Valentina, tell us what is the agenda for day 2?
So the agenda has been full. Obviously, yesterday was such a win for President Biden and also for all of the leaders of the G7, because honestly, G7 has been waned in favor. And so the fact that they were able to get that 50 billion approved is good. Now the details of how it's going to be done, of course, is still being stitched out. Well, today leaders are going to be talking about migration. Migration is an issue which Italy obviously is very much concerned with, but this is becoming a global issue. Everybody is, all of the leaders, some way affected. So what they're trying to tackle is how do we mitigate from having to leave their homes? And so there are talks in how do we invest in the countries so that the people don't even have to leave. Obviously, that's a big, tall order. Ukraine is also on the agenda. How to use finances best to help rebuild, reconstruct Ukraine. And all of these things are underlying and underscoring the value of G7. War on Gaza and artificial intelligence as well. The Pope Francis is the first Pope in history to ever speak at the summit. And he is now tackling AI, which seems a bit of an unusual mix when you have an institution like the Vatican talk about AI, but of course they will tackle it from ethics view. How will this impact them? How will AI simply have to developing technology influence people around the world?
Right, Valentina, thanks very much indeed for joining us with the very latest updates there on the G7. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.